Hi, my name is Tom Pettit. Joseph Smith was about to lose the Kirtland Temple due to foreclosure. He prayed for a miracle, and the Lord sent John Tanner. Now, this time, John and his family were living in Lake George, New York. John was incredibly wealthy, and he was also a Methodist. His first introduction to the restored gospel of Jesus Christ came about when two elders visited the town and advertised that they were going to be holding a meeting in which they would explain their beliefs. John and his friend, who was also a Methodist, they decided that they were going to go to this meeting and they were going to challenge the missionaries by using the Bible to put down their beliefs. Well, they went to the meeting and neither one of them felt as if to interrupt the meeting. In fact, John's friend decided to just get up and quietly leave. John remained behind, still intently listening to the missionary's message. But then he did end up interrupting the meeting. He stood up during the sermon and he asked the missionaries if he could purchase one of these books, the Book of Mormon, in which they were talking so much about. The missionaries politely said, "Yes, of course, but let's talk about it after the meeting." John sat back down and he continued to listen throughout the rest of the meeting. At the end, he did meet up with the missionaries. He secured a copy of the Book of Mormon and he spent the next several weeks comparing it side by side with the Bible. He found through that study that the Book of Mormon was true. He invited the missionaries to come and teach he and his family more about the gospel. After a short period of time, John and his wife decided that they wanted to join the church and be baptized. However, John told the missionaries that although he wanted to be baptized, he couldn't, because at this time he had a great infection in his leg, which would rule out any possibility or hope of him getting into the water. The missionaries explained that the true church of Jesus Christ had been restored. John said, "Yes, I believe that." They said, "Well, then you must believe that all of the church was restored." John said, "Yes, I do." The missionaries further went on to teach, "Well, then that means that the priesthood power and authority, which Jesus Christ used to heal people in his day, must also be restored." John knew by that logic that it must be true, that the priesthood power and authority must be contained in the true church. The missionaries then offered to give John a blessing, which he accepted. Immediately following the blessing, John stood up, he sat down his crutches, and began to walk around the house. When he had enough confidence in himself and his walking ability, he and the missionaries and his wife walked a half a mile to the nearest river. John was baptized at about midnight that night, and they walked a half a mile back to the home without the aid of crutches. That was the first of many miracles that would take place in John's life. John, because of his wealth and generosity while living there in New York, he paid for the move of 7 families to go to Kirtland. He also funded not only his 2 sons, or 2 of his sons, to serve in Zion's camp, but many other individuals to serve in that group as well under the leadership of Joseph Smith. Well, back to Joseph Smith and his problem that he's having now with the Kirtland Temple and paying that loan before the bank forecloses on him. Joseph Smith's about 3 weeks from that deadline, and he prays for help. He doesn't just pray that money will show up, but he prays that somebody will come with the financial means and the generosity to donate that money to the temple. John Tanner at that same time had a dream one night. And in that dream, he was told that he should sell all of his personal belongings and move his family and gather with the saints in Kirtland. Well, John woke up the next morning and he was a little bit nervous to kind of break this news to his wife. They were living in New York and they had a great life. They had a lot of business and great income, which produced a wonderful lifestyle. And asking his wife to sell all of that and move to some unknown town and really start their businesses over again gave John a little bit of hesitancy in approaching his wife. However, he got up the confidence and he tells his wife, "I've had this dream. It's important that we sell everything and move to Kirtland. What do you think?" Her response, "How soon can we go?" She was ready to follow the direction of the Lord at a moment's notice. So they sold everything that they had, and they had a lot to sell. They sold 2,200 acres of land. They sold a hotel that they owned, several homes that they owned, a dairy, a sawmill, and even an island, which was in their possession. After selling all those possessions, they packed up and they moved to Kirtland, which was 500 miles away. John Tanner and his wife arrived the day before the mortgage note was due. Not knowing anything about the outstanding bill that was about to come due and the potential loss of the Kirtland Temple, John Tanner immediately sought out Joseph Smith. Upon meeting Joseph Smith, John Tanner felt impressed to give him $2,000. The outstanding invoice that was due the next day, $2,000. Joseph Smith was able to take that $2,000 cash, pay the bank, and keep the Kirtland Temple. Over time, John Tanner would donate an additional $13,000 to the temple construction fund. And in addition to that, he'd give an additional upwards of $30,000 to Joseph Smith to use in other ventures in building up the kingdom of God on the earth. In all, John Tanner gave over $50,000 to the church. When the Kirtland era of church history started to come to a close, all the saints went to gather in far west Missouri. John Tanner and his family were going to follow the prophet to Missouri. But at this point in his life, he had given all to the church. And from his account, when he and his family left for Missouri, they left with $7.50 in his pocket, an old horse, a broken down wagon, 9 children, and 1,000 miles to go. He testified that they had to beg for their food along the way. They even had to bury a daughter somewhere between Kirtland and Missouri. After the Missouri experience and the saints relocated to Nauvoo, John Tanner and his family did as well, although they ended up on the west side of the Mississippi River in a town called Montrose, Iowa, just across the river from the town of Nauvoo. In 1844, John Tanner was called on a mission. Now, John Tanner, over all these times, there's about 10 years, he kept in his possession a promissory note. Joseph Smith, when he had received that original $2,000 from John Tanner, wrote out a note to John, promising, when I have the money, I promise I'm going to give this $2,000 back to you. It was a loan. It was something that both parties, Joseph and John, had expected to be repaid at a future time. Well, so when John gets called on a mission in 1844, he still has that promissory note. And that promissory note, if it was cashed in, would have done his family a lot of good in his absence. As John is heading out of town on his way on his mission, who's coming the other direction on the road? Joseph Smith the prophet. At this time, Joseph, along with so many others in the church, referred to John Tanner as Father Tanner. Joseph Smith greeted Father Tanner. John pulls that promissory note out of his pocket and he hands it to Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith reads it and he says to Father Tanner, Father Tanner, I am in your debt. John Tanner simply replies to the prophet Joseph, the only debt is that of gratitude, and it is mine. Joseph Smith embraced Father Tanner. They both wept. Eventually, when they were able to console themselves and speak again, the prophet Joseph Smith said to John Tanner, made a prophetic promise, your children shall never go and beg for bread again. This prophecy came true in John's life and in the life of his children and in the life of his children's children, is my understanding. The Lord does wonderful, miraculous things. In this case, he miraculously saved the Kirtland Temple. But usually the miracles that come about is when he utilizes the kindness, generosity, talents, and skills of individuals, the way that the Lord did with John Tanner. For more videos of stories from church history, please visit my video collection at tomcpettit.com by clicking the link in the video description below.